I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're taking a look at the mysteries of the mind with Dr. Robert Thatcher. He's written a powerful book that's called Beauty and the Brain, The Aesthetic Compass. Today, we're going to discover how our brains perceive beauty and its profound connection to the universe. And we will explore groundbreaking insights that blend neuroscience with the aesthetics of nature. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Doctor, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Well, great to see you, and thank you for inviting me.
You know, it's said that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It turns out our eyes are close to what really is the beholder of the beauty, and that's the brain. Tell us a little bit about your work in this area.
Well, this really began when I was at the NYU School of Medicine, in the Department of Psychiatry, with a good friend, Eric Schwartz, who had a Ph.D. in physics, and he came to our offices, and E. Roy John asked me to help teach him about neuroscience. He was very intelligent. And he started working on learning about brain and neuroanatomy and working in experiments. At that time, we were doing experiments with cats and evaluating where memory and how the brain is working. And he came into my office one day and he said, "Bob, I just read this paper by Daniel and Witteridge that shows that the mapping of the retina, which is a disc, has the shape to the visual cortex, which is it's a U shape. It's, if you imagine X and Y, it goes like this. But it's an exponential in mathematics. I mean, it's a rapid rate of growth, and it's very important in the universe. Is the way to describe what happens around, from galaxies to weather and everything. So, and he says, well, this mapping, I studied this in physics. It's called a conformal map. It was discovered by von Helmholtz, or actually Bernard Riemann, in the late 1800s. And it was used for navigation around the world. So essentially, if you, in those days, if you look at you have a globe that shows the Earth. So people were using globes to navigate, but you can take that globe, the sphere, and you can make it into a rectangle. Okay? That's called a conformal map. That way you can put the whole Earth up on just a board in the back of the ship, so people can travel around the world. And you can also see where nighttime is and daytime is and everything. So you know what's happening, 10,000 miles away. So that became a standard in navigation. And that's really what it was used for. But Eric learned about it. It also is used then in physics because of the way that tornadoes and hurricanes and very powerful forces, they become logarithmic spirals. Even if you get a cup of coffee and you put your spoon through it very rapidly, you'll see two spirals on each side of the track of the spoon through the cup. So logarithmic spirals, like you see in snail shells and galaxies, are fundamental to the energy forms in the universe. But what was amazing is that is the way the brain maps from the retina to the visual cortex. The retina is a disc, the visual cortex is a rectangle, and the mapping of a disc to a rectangle is a logarithmic spiral. It goes like this. The cochlea is a logarithmic spiral. The mapping of a straight line in our somatosensory cortex for touch maps as a spiral around our limbs. So all of our senses are actually going through this logarithmic transform. So, and that's very important. The logarithm allows you to do multiplication by addition. You just add two things and it's actually multiplication. So the brain does extremely complicated computations by first formatting whatever we're seeing or hearing through a logarithmic transform. So then neurons will converge and they'll add together and actually are doing multiplication. So you compare the present to the past in 50 milliseconds of time, because it's all formatted already into the ability to do multiplication and comparison of and also project what's going into the future by creating an image and comparing it to what you learned in the past. That all happens very, very fast. Mm. And actually, the brain only weighs 2.5 to 3 pounds. And in order for that to be done by a computer, because the brain doesn't use digital zeros and ones, it does this by like the flow of water. If you pull the plug in your bathtub, and you'll see that spiral going down. That's how the brain's doing. It's just the way things flow. But it would take a computer the size of Rhode Island to actually use to do what the 2.5 pounds of tissue does. Okay?
Amazing.
And so that's an amazing aspect of the human mind and the human brain. It's allowed human beings to explore the universe and evolve and develop and use higher levels of thinking. As long as you have education, to be able to train that brain to do the right thing. So that's really that common format then for all the senses of what was important. And then aesthetics comes out of that because of we naturally, there's a whole history in aesthetics. We see certain forms. A flower that radially goes out, that's actually one form of the extreme of the logarithmic spiral. If we look at a snail shell, it looks pretty, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the human body, Leonardo da Vinci showed that it has a ratio that's also the golden proportion. The top of the head to the chin versus the shoulder to the waist, that ratio is the golden proportion. Mm-hmm. Things like that. So, as you get older, you kind of get away from that proportion. But for most of our life, we have that proportion.
It's very interesting that, our brains are wired like this in conjunction with our eyes. And our perceptions of what is aesthetically beautiful is generally agreed upon by most people. Most people see the same things as beautiful, right?
Yes, they do. A sunset, a flower, a flowing river.
And even faces.
And faces. Faces are golden proportionally shaped too. Really, the ratio of the top of your head to your chin to the side, if you take that ratio, it's close to the golden proportion.
As long as it has to do with symmetry?
Yes, a ratio is really 2/3, 1/3, roughly. It's 1.62, whatever it is. It's not exactly 1/3, 2/3. It's a irrational number that Bernard Riemann discovered, but it approximates infinity. So that's described a bit in the book. But that's how, and also it does computation. It's called computational neuroanatomy. The brain is actually able to do computations just by convergence on a neuron. That one part of the neuron, one part of the brain, let's say the frontal lobes, converges on the parietal lobes, and the occipital lobes converge on the parietal lobes, same neuron. But those are now multiplied together and form matches and mismatches in very brief periods of time.
Very, very interesting. Is there a discovery from your research that is in your book that surprised you?
Well, that whole thing, when Eric came into my office, because my job was to help teach him about neuroscience, that was just an eye-opener for me. And then at that time, I was actually busy writing a book with E. Roy John. We had just more or less finished the book. So I was able to put in a few comments about it in the book, but it really caught my attention. It's really fundamentally profound. And Eric was able to create a whole division of neuroscience called computational neuroscience. And so the simplicity of that, and what actually the Department of Defense, because this time, anyway, they came to Eric, and Eric came into my office and said, well, somebody from I forgot the name of the agency in the Department of Defense wants to meet with me in downtown Manhattan. He's going to go there at 2:00. And he comes back at about 4, and his eyes are real big. And he says, they just gave me a big suitcase with money. I had to go to the bank and deposit the money because they want to use this to create ways to create guided missiles and bombs. And that literally started happening.
Amazing.
And that now was used in the early 1980s to improve the accuracy of guided missiles.
One of the things I thought was interesting in your book as well, it's how natural phenomenon like hurricanes and galaxies relate to our brain structure. It's the same spiral, is that what it is?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a minimal energy state. That's the key to it. So life really is it's a complicated process, but
Yeah.
if you minimize the energy required, then the longer you'll live and the longer things happen. So it's a simplicity in the form is also minimization of energy. And that happens with galaxies and spirals and snail shells and all kinds of things.
Because of its mathematical structure, does that mean there is sort of an algorithm to beauty or a
Yeah,
mathematical
it's
formula?
yeah. Leonardo da Vinci and many great artists, and I go through mention many of them in my book. They discovered these back in the 1500s, and it became very important to them. And so a lot of art in the early stages of human development involved the use of this proportion, this ratio. And so it's influenced humankind. It not only gives rise to aesthetic pleasure, but it structurally actually it makes things easier to build and do things with. Later on, I mean, the logarithmic, the exponential is used in the economy. If you invest $10 versus $1,000, the rate of growth is an exponential, but it's much bigger with $1,000 than $10.
Exactly.
And so that was discovered in economics. But that's the same kind of thing. It all kind of it really comes down to minimal effort, minimal energy and expenditures with greatest outcome based on simplicity.
Amazing.
Simplicity of form.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Who's your target audience for the book?
Well, there are scientists. I tried to write the book so it isn't too scientific. I mean, I have to have some science in there. But it would be probably people who are interested in art and also why to try get a better understanding of the universe, of why our brains have these spiral forms in them, and why the universe has these shapes and forms, why flowers have radial forms, and why things happen with simplicity. Our brains are really taking things apart and looking at things getting complicated, but it's actually the format of information coming in has already been simplified for us. And so it's people who are interested in art, music, for example. Beethoven has that ratio 6:9, and when you want to create art and make it with form and proportion, that has meaning. We usually just automatically approximate it, but if you know that that is what's important, you can structure your art with that in mind. And many artists have done that throughout the centuries.
And now, knowing the formula, we can actually program this into computer software and AI and create things of beauty following this recipe, if you will, right?
Yeah, you can. That is done in a lot of
Amazing.
different forms.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The name of the book is Beauty and the Brain, not Beauty and the Beast, Beauty and the Brain, the Aesthetic Compass. It is an amazing book that just shows you how our brains perceive beauty and its profound connection to the universe. It is groundbreaking in its insights, and it blends neuroscience with the aesthetics of nature. Highly recommended. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Your time. Thank you, sir. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.